Posse from Boston EMS. Mike is a deputy superintendent serving as the night commander at Boston EMS. He became a National Registered EMT in 1978, and in 1982 began his career at Boston EMS. In 1986, Mike was promoted to paramedic, where he worked on an ALS ambulance. Michael was promoted to Deputy Superintendent Commander of Field Operations in 1995. He is federally trained in NIMS, ICS, with extensive experience as an incident commander of emergencies throughout the city. Deputy Posse responded to 9/11 to work at Ground Zero with FDNY Command. In 2012 and 2013, he served as the finish line commander at the Boston Marathon, making him the EMS incident commander for the response to the Boston bombing. Deputy Posse holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Public Administration from the University of Massachusetts and has received numerous awards and commendations for his service to the citizens of Boston. Please join me in welcoming Mike Posse.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me now back? Okay. It's an honor to be here today to speak to you folks. A little bit of an overwhelming introduction. I'm not the greatest public speaker. Some of you guys might be able to identify, I'm a street guy. I don't even have a day job. I still work nights. All right? So, 33 years on the job, it don't buy you nothing. Okay, so please bear with me. I'll try not to freeze up. I'll try and keep this moving along so that we can learn something together. I can give you what I felt that day and what we've been through since then. So thanks. I will warn you, some of the video and some of the PowerPoint slides are very graphic. Okay? Okay. So we'll begin with that. Enough said. Let's get the show on the road so we can move on. Oh, I'm sorry. Special shout out. Anybody here from Pittsburgh EMS? No? A few weeks after the Boston Marathon, Pittsburgh EMS guys, in their show of support and a charity foundation that the police, the fire department, and Boston EMS funded, the guys that worked the marathon that day in Pittsburgh all wore our department baseball caps to support us. And anybody who worked overtime that day, they donated the proceeds of their overtime check to the Boston First Responders Fund for the survivors of the Boston Marathon. So, a very nice shout out to our brothers and sisters in Pittsburgh. This is the opening video just prior to the first bombing. I was about 100 feet from that blast.
Separate devices. All units being wireless sensors devices.
UCC, did I hear that correctly?
Yes, confirmative. Two devices just went off and boils in an extra. All units extreme caution.
All units be advised, explosive device. Everyone use caution, please.
This is Randy Souza, our first paramedic on scene. He's about 50 feet from the first blast. It knocked him right off his feet. Technical difficulty, I'm sorry. I told you I don't have an office job. I can barely get the computer in the truck to work sometimes. We did a pre-check on this and it worked fine. Honest. This is from the finish line looking down Boylston Street. The two bombs were placed about a block apart.
John 1, UCC, what was that on Boylston Street? Two separate devices. All units being applied oil sensor devices.
UCC, did I do that correctly?
Yes, confirmative. Two devices just went off at Boylston and Exeter. All units extreme caution.
All units be advised, the explosive device, everyone use caution, please. All units hold your positions. All units hold your positions. I think we've got confirmation on the injuries. All units hold your positions.
All the officers, all crews return to their vehicles, the Alpha station.
Return to your vehicles, please, everybody.
Zone 1, calling tactical.
Zone 1, go.
Prepare receiving patients at the Alpha tent.
Okay.
Alpha 10 has a message receiving patients.
Alpha team has the message, receiving patients.
Tactical,
IT, go.
Okay, tactical, I see. We don't have a count yet on casualties. But we are receiving casualties coming in. They're usually being directed down towards Alpha. Would you notify all the hospitals that there's potential here for a mass casualty event? Everyone's looking for Dr. Tango 2. Tango 2. Exit. I got 3 people now, heavy trauma. Exeter and Boylston, intersection.
Exeter and Boylston, heavy trauma, Exeter and Boylston. Do I have any units nearby?
Paramedic 40. Paramedic 40 was not in Boylston.
The intersection is just
Okay,
beyond the
T40, okay, Tango
police
1,
offices here. It's in between both bomb sites.
I need another BLS unit to Exeter and Boylston.
You'll stop that way.
30, you'll start that way. 30. Unit with a 1 at the end, go. Zone 1.
Tactical, this is 1. I have multiple casualties on Boylston. 673 between Exeter and Dartmouth.
673 Boylston, multiple. 673 multiple casualties.
One after the other.
Show me heading that way.
I'm in this crowd right here. This is the area
30, okay.
when we had approximately 40 victims that were in there. Moved for the initial bomb
Division
blast.
supervisor did not read that. Division 3, I don't know. Go. me, I have 40 patients at least. 40 patients at least. We need a triage stand brought over to the key location of the triage stand again.
Division 4.
Just 4.
I've got one down at Newbury in Exeter, right in front of Joe's American Bar and Grill.
In front of the American Bar and Grill on Newbury. Is there an X-ray unit?
X-ray 910, where is it?
In front of the Bar and Grill, American Bar and Grill on Newbury.
Show to it.
Our
Okay.
X-ray units are our bike team. We have over 20 members on our bike
Hotel
team.
2.
They carry basic first aid supplies and defibrillator. They're a tremendous asset for special events.
Last unit did not copy.
Okay, my city by the sea. You might recognize some of these sports icons. I don't like the Pittsburgh Penguins, I don't like the Philly 76ers, I don't like the Pirates, and I don't like the Steelers. How many people did I piss off today? Okay, we're actually not that big of a city, but we are packed on top of each other. We are very densely populated. We're about 48 square miles. But on a summer's day, you can hear what your neighbors saying and doing sometimes in some of our neighborhoods. The houses are so close together, and it's a very old city. Sleeping population now is up to about 650,000. Daytime, we swell up to about 1.5 million. And then you throw in the college student population, which is about another 250,000 kids. Our service is a third municipal public service under the Bureau of Public Health Commission. We staff 25 ambulances a day. Of that, 20 BLS, 5 ALS. It's a two-tier system. We do about 320, 350 calls a day, depending. When we break 400, it's usually a pretty busy day. We have a very high utilization rate between the hours of 6 a.m. and 2 a.m. We transport about 83,000 people to the hospital a year, and we're up around 140 responses a year. Now, a lot of these responses never generate a patient. We support the police department in tactical operations. We support the fire department in a hazmat scene or a rescue scene or a building fire or something like that. So that adds to responses that we don't generate patients from. We use Braun ambulances on GMC and Chevy chassis. Now we're using the International TerraStars. We have 244 EMTs. We currently have a class in the academy, which will generate, I hope, another 50 EMTs. The new mayor that was just recently elected is committed to expanding EMS and putting back some dollars into our budget that were taken away and level funded over the last 5 years. So that's great to have a mayor that's supportive of our mission. This is us at a glance on any given day and what we do. Tall ships, special events, tactical aspects at sporting championship celebrations. And a lot of this is drilling. A lot of these slides are from drilling as well. Some of them are older. We drill at least 4 times a year. And as I go further, the importance of that, it becomes pretty evident. These are our partners in public safety in Boston, the Boston Police Department, the Boston Fire Department. They're very supportive of our operation, regardless of what you hear, see online, or read in newspapers or whatever. When it comes to a common goal of getting the job done, we work pretty well together. We also belong to a Homeland Security region, UASI region, which encompasses all the smaller cities and towns around the border of Boston. So there's 9 towns, 9 cities or towns in our jurisdiction. We share everything. Because Boston is the biggest neighborhood, the biggest city in the jurisdiction, we pretty much manage all the assets and deploy out as any town needs. Say an incident happens outside of Boston. We have a focus, it's an all hazards focus. We regionally collaborate, and you know, we train together with our neighbors across the river in Cambridge or across the river in Quincy, you know, so that we get to know each other, so that when something does happen, we're already on familiar ground. We're not strangers trying to make the best of a bad situation. And if that's one thing I could stress to the multiple jurisdictions that are here today, is to get to know your neighbors, the next township over, the next city over. Work with them, drill with them, so that when you both have to show up at an incident, you know how to work with each other. We have made the best use, as we think we can, out of our Homeland Security dollars to both protect our personnel and to equip our region. Some of the different grants we've had, sorry about that, I'm not used to one of these things. Here we are. We bought high visibility outerwear, both vest and coat for our folks. Helmets, we already had helmets, but where our department was expanding and our budget dollars were being cut, the Homeland Security Initiative was a good way to boost our cash. We have also, since just after 9/11, started training all of our members in the region in all weapons of mass, WMD stuff, hazmat stuff, anything that we thought germane, under the guise of what we call the Duvalier Institute. It's part of our training academy. It was started by our department with Homeland Security dollars, and it's named after firefighter Manny Duvalier, who was on Engine 5 in FDNY and was killed on 9/11. His father was our previous medical director, Dr. Peter Moyer, and it was named after his son in honor of Manny. They do all regional teaching. They teach hospitals, police departments, fire departments in all WMD aspects now throughout the state. And they teach us as well. This is what I refer to as the drills. If somebody comes to us and says, the Coast Guard comes to us and says, hey, we want to do a 6-ship drill. You get a cruise ship out in the harbor, 200 people with norovirus. Can we drill? Can we work out a plan? Can we do something? Anybody that comes to us and asks us if they want our input, they want us to drill with them, we do. We welcome the opportunity. Because through drilling and exercising, even if it's just a tabletop drill, you discover things that aren't going to work, things that will work, and you get to know your partners on the other side in other jurisdictions. So we drill at least 4 times a year. Some of them are major drills. We also participate in what they call Urban Shield. Everybody in the room familiar with Urban Shield? It started off being a SWAT competition out in the West Coast. It's translated into an all hazards type drill that runs for 24 hours. They do it annually. There's a component for SWAT, there's a component for EOD, there's a component for fire, and there's a component for EMS. And it's a citywide drill for 24 hours. It's very taxing, but it's very good. One of the last things we bought with our Homeland Security dollars was each department member was issued their own portable radio. And in that radio has also all the UASI jurisdictions in our area, so we can talk to our partners. We have a mutual aid ambulance channel in that radio as well, along with our 10 tactical channels that we have. These are actually two of the first two. They were right near me at the finish line, bringing back two of the first two patients that day. The radio channel that I spoke to, we were able to put a console in each of these private ambulances so that we can call on them in the event of a disaster and communicate with them on a common frequency to coordinate a response to something. They're in our regular backup network, and now we're able to communicate with them on a regular basis, so which is very good, as opposed to a phone call from our dispatcher to their dispatcher and then being relayed, because things are always lost in translation, you know that. This is our new bus. This is its call sign is Tango 10. Bought with UASI dollars. It's a multi-patient vehicle that we've already used 3 or 4 times since its delivery. It can carry 16 stretcher patients. It can be converted to carry wheelchair and or a combination of walking wounded and stretcher patients. The back opens up, there's a ramp, so beds can be pushed up the ramp or wheelchairs. On the outside, it has Bluetooth capability so that we can do cordless monitoring of patients outside as well and use it as a portable first aid station, so to speak, or a triage treatment holding area until our transport assets arrive on scene. And this is Tango 1. We have 2 of them. They're our light duty tactical response units. They carry mass casualty supplies, backboard, sock, anything you need for mass casualty work, as well as additional PPE, hazmat suits, SCBA, an additional communications compartment where we have a rack of charged portable batteries, fixed radio communication, and water hydration supplies, things like that. Now on to the marathon. The marathon is the oldest marathon in the country. It's a 26.2 mile race, so obviously it's a marathon, but only 2.8 miles of that is in the city. The rest of it is not within our jurisdiction, but it's coordinated from one end to the other through MEMA, through the Massachusetts Emergency Management Association, because it affects so many towns along the route. And basically the state is cut in half for 26 miles, and it comes right through the heart of the city, and we get the largest crowd swell of the race, obviously, because of all the universities along the route and everybody that comes into town that day to watch this event. I don't know how many of you are familiar with your American history, but April 15th, not just tax day, but it used to be April 19th, is what we call Patriots Day. Patriots Day was about the Paul Revere and the shot heard around the world and stuff. So it has some political significance, historical significance as well. So as I said, it starts on a Thursday, the marathon. Even though the races run on a Monday, the town starts gearing up on Thursday. Streets are starting to get closed down. Roads are getting closed off. There's special events all around town that week leading up to the event. The hotels are filling up to capacity. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic along the race route because they want to see they want to go and have their picture taken at the finish line. They want to go and eat at some of the nice restaurants along the route and stuff like that. So the town really starts to build towards this event on Thursday, even though the race is on Monday. We implement our incident command system, NIMS ICS, starting early on. We divide the city up into zones so that we can control our span of control and command. We put on 9 additional BLS units and 4 additional ALS units just for the race itself, and assign them to 2 of our medical stations. We had 11 bikes on that day. We had 3 medical stations, and each one of those medical stations had multiple proceed-out teams. They may be on golf carts or gators, if you're familiar with them, John Deere little tractor cars, which are great, because you just can't get through a crowd with an ambulance, obviously, and we're able to get up and down the race route with those and with the bikes. Dispatch operations, we will split up the city. We'll put citywide operations on one channel, and we will run the event, the marathon, on a different tactical channel. We also, as I mentioned, we have coordination centers. The Unified Command Center, which is at Boston Police Headquarters, which has a representative from every agency that has a stake in the incident. There's also representatives from every department at the Massachusetts Emergency Management area. And then we have what we call a Medical Intelligence Center, the MIC, that operates out of Boston EMS headquarters, that coordinates hospital availability, accountability, patient tracking, things like that. As I mentioned, we only own 2.8 miles of the race, but we own the bulk of the population of the race. I'm sure many of you are familiar with NIMS ICS. We operate under NIMS ICS all the time, where there's one incident commander, and then everybody's assigned a role by the chief, and you work under that incident command system for the event. In 2012, my first time as the finish line commander, it was 85 degrees and hot and muggy. That's not a good mix for runners. We had 2,100 patients that day, 2,181 patients. As you can see, in previous years, we've only had like 12 or 1,300. We had 241 transports, some of which were critical from acute hyponatremia and hypothermia. And the hospital received an additional 20 patients beyond our transports. That day, we developed what we called a hypothermia protocol. If somebody had altered mental status and had a rectal temp of 103 plus, they went to the immersion room. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but big bathtubs filled with ice water to immerse them, cool them down. So this is Monday morning. Everybody comes to the Boston Common to get on like 100 school buses to be shuttled out to the race start. And then for us, it's we're up and bright and early, 7 a.m. getting ready. This is what we call our EMS Compound. right adjacent to the finish line on Copley Plaza. The truck's delivering our equipment. This is our compound all set up. This is the morning briefing. The chief, he's standing on the power gate of one of our trucks. The chief and the medical director delivering the morning briefing. I think I'm over here someplace hiding, having a coffee, sneaking a smoke. This is our ambulance staging. This big white structure in the back, this goes an entire city block. It's one large medical tent. There's a better picture of it ahead. But to give you an idea of where we are in reference to our large medical station. And then, our personnel, they're given their assignments from the briefings. They draw their equipment. Our bike team is having a briefing here with the bike team supervisor. Some folks are assigned to golf carts, some folks are assigned to gators, some folks are assigned to tents, or they're on foot or on the race route. Here's our medical tent set up. We have one small little corner of this gigantic tent, and that is because we will manage the acute patients with our medical docs that are there. Everybody else, cramps, blisters, whatever, will get managed by the volunteers. We get hundreds of volunteers of physical therapists, podiatrists, sports medicine docs, and nurses that volunteer for that day. But anything acute is managed by us. This is our immersion tub that we were referring to. We have like 4 of them. And then this is a look at the rest of the tent, just how big it is. This can handle about 300 patients. In 2012, we had every bed filled, a couple of times over. These young ladies are from public health preparedness that work with us. They were responsible for patient tracking that day in our patient tracking system. We have a computer-generated patient tracking system. It's a little wand device that reads like barcodes like you would have in a supermarket or something. Each race entrant, we can scan their barcode and gather their information. It will download to our system, and we can also update that we're shipping them off to Boston Medical Center, or that they were treated and released, anything like that. And if it's a spectator that we bring in, we put a wristband around them, and we can scan that wristband and that add it. The system also will read most driver's licenses. You know how most driver's licenses now have a barcode on the back? The system will read that as well. And then the race begins. It steps off in 3 different categories. We have the wheelchair participants, the elite women, and then the general start. And it takes, 2+ hours to get to the finish line. And if that isn't enough, on that day, every year, the Red Sox got to throw in a baseball game. And they make it nice and early, so when the game is over, everybody can empty out of Fenway Park, run down to Kenmore Square, and add another 40,000 people to the crowd. True story. Every year they play Marathon Day. They start at 11 o'clock, and by the time the majority of the runners are coming across the finish line of through Kenmore Square, the game is getting out, and they flood Kenmore Square. And then these are the breakdowns that year. As you can see, between 2:30 and 3 o'clock is usually the largest wave of amateur runners to cross the finish line. The folks that are running it in under 4 hours. And that's also the time that the bombs were set to go off. This is my most troubling slide. This is before the bombings here. This is the Martin Richards family. Martin was a 9-year-old boy who went to the marathon with his family. This is his mom, that's his sister Jane, that's his dad, that's his older brother. This is former number 2. I won't say any vulgarities as to how I feel about former number 2. Martin was killed. Jane was a amputation below the knee. Mom had a traumatic brain injury. I had the shitty job of having to leave Martin on the sidewalk covered in a sheet and telling his father that he couldn't ride in the ambulance with his wife and daughter because I had other victims that I needed ambulance space for. You may have to face that someday in your career. Maybe not something of this magnitude, even something as simple as a multi-patient MBA. So our first explosion goes off at the finish line. I'm not exactly sure what it is at first. This is a very old neighborhood. We've had some transformer explosions there in the past. I asked the UCC, which are my eyes in the sky, if they have a visualization on it before they can give me an answer. Bomb number 2 goes off. I'm pretty much convinced I know what I'm dealing with now. They're only a city block apart. As you can see, it was only 10 seconds later. How none of my personnel were injured, I can't believe that none of them were. I had 3 people stationed right at the finish line, about 50 feet from the first blast. All 3 were knocked right on their ass. They picked themselves up and they went right to work. I couldn't have been proud of them. This is, if you saw in the video, there was a building, brick building with black bow windows on it, black plexiglass windows on it. This is that building. Every year that this company has a private party, and they had a photographer there, and the guy just started shooting pictures out the window through the broken glass at the crowd below. And these are the images that he caught. There's a series of them. And you see this guy here in the middle. His clothes are completely blown apart. And, you know, ladies and gentlemen, these weren't no genius bombers. These were low-grade fireworks that they improvised themselves. You know, that they learned in some how to build your own bomb manual. You know, think about if they were using something more high grade. We had no structure collapse. We had no fire. We just had a lot of devastating injury. In years past, we had a problem with crowds. For years, we used this blizzard fence to keep the crowds back. And as years grew and crowds grew, they started to press against that. So somebody, in their infinite wisdom, decided, oh, we'll use pipe staging to hold them back some more. And instead of building up, you know, when you're doing construction, they laid the pipe staging on the ground. So that was a real obstacle to get through before we could actually get to the patients. And that blizzard fence actually became projectiles and caused a significant amount of injuries. This is, I told you it's graphic. I mean, sure, some of you have seen video, interviews, television shows. This is Jeff Bowman, a young man who lost both his legs. He was at Site 1. This is what I call walking wounded that day. In any other instance, you know, there would have been a priority 1 trauma patient, right? I'm passing these guys running up Boylston Street. They got their clothes blown apart, they're loaded with shrapnel, and they're bleeding. But they're walking, and they're walking away from the scene. I'm like, head for the big white tent. They'll take care of you there. Anybody that I encountered running up Boylston Street that day, I said, head for the big white tent, they'll take care of you there. And that's what these guys did. You know that game, Finding Waldo, that cartoon, Finding Waldo? You look in the crowd at pitches or whatever. There I am, there's Waldo right there. I recognize my ball spot. My kids picked up on, Dad, that's you! I'm like, yeah, okay, thank you. They only know me by this position or this position. This is, I'm not very good with this, see? This is Site 2. I won't point out, but there are 2 dead bodies here. This was the Forum Restaurant. The Martin family was here. This is looking from the finish line tower up Boylston Street and the organized chaos we had that day. What we had to do was, it's very difficult getting the ambulance on this street just because of all the physical barricades there are. What we used to work on the street is, you know, our golf carts and our gators and stuff like that. So our only access is this cross street right here. Until we get stuff that's not in vision on the screen out of the way to get the ambulances up there. And unfortunately, the fire department struck an automatic second alarm for a building explosion that day. And what did they do? They blocked up my only cross street. So me and the fire chief had some few friendly words. We rectified the situation in a couple of, actually I know the guy very well. We're very good friends. We rectified it, but it just put up, you know, oh, hey, what the, you know what I mean? So, this poor truck here, this thing got stripped. You know, they were lucky they had a stretcher to go to the hospital with by the time they were able to leave that scene. And as you can see now, this is later, a few minutes later, we're starting to get some trucks in to go up the other way towards the second bombing site. These guys were able to crash through, and they did. They crashed through a bunch of barriers. As a matter of fact, it's on video, but it's not here in the slide. These heavy fences that they use for barriers, the police use, they came up the street dragging one up the street in the truck. The mechanic was a little bit pissed off, but we didn't care. This is street level at Site 2, outside the Forum Restaurant. As you can see, some people are running inside the restaurant for cover. Others are attempting to take care of the civilians that are injured there. And that's one thing I have to say. You know, you would think explosions like this, terrorist act like this, people just run away, right? For fear. When I got to the first bomb site, it was outside a store called Marathon Sports, a sporting goods store. And it had a bunch of young guys, young folks, employees there. And they come up to me and they said, Chief, how can I help? How can I help? They didn't want to leave. They just wanted to stay and help people until I had more resources there. So they were taking their belts off of their trousers and making makeshift tourniquets. They were running back into the store and grabbing t-shirts off the shelf and trying to make pressure dressings until, you know, more of us got there and could organize it a little better. So, you know, when the chips are down, you can never count out your fellow man. is just another site looking at the form site number 2. Same. We don't know who this guy is. He doesn't work for us, but he was dressed in yellow. This is Deputy Gill, one of my counterparts. He comes along and he finds this guy in the front seat of this ambulance. So he had a few choice words for him. So he got him out of the ambulance. So what does he do? He gets on the gator. He's bound and determined he's going to drive something that day. So that's the other thing you got to watch out for. You know, is, yeah, people want to help, but and what made matters worse is, you know, we're dealing with what we're dealing with on Boylston Street. We've had 2 confirmed explosions. We know they were bombs. We're worried the whole time that we're there that there are other devices, because you remember your training, watch out for secondary devices. They're there to take out the first responders, right? That's what we're thinking about. And the next thing you know, we get reports that there's been an explosion at the JFK Library, which is a very iconic public piece in Boston. You know, it has a significant political impact. Fortunately, it was a transformer that exploded, just coincidental. But it certainly made my blood pressure go up another few notches. And this is what the tent looked like after the fact, you know? And here's one of our medics, Katie, she's just sitting there, she's like, oh, you know, I mean, what the guys went through in the tent was like, whoop. Because what we did for the most part was, from site 1, we were closer to the tent than we were to getting people into ambulances. And I knew I had a fleet of ambulances at the back of the tent. So it was easier to move the patients to the tent, through the tent, treat them quickly, and evacuate them out that way. Everybody from the second bomb site was moved directly to hospital by ambulance. My staging area, I call for a staging area. This is 2 blocks over and 2 blocks up. That had to be moved because somebody ran away and left a backpack in that. But we were able to overcome. Call went out over Bama, our Boston Ambulance Mutual Aid Network. And I had about 50 ambulances in about 15 minutes. I had plenty of help. How would you like to be this poor cop? Right? Now, he's told, you gotta stop the race. There's still 5,000, 8,000 runners on the course. You know, he doesn't know what's happening. He's just hearing what's over his radio, and he's like, stop, stop. Right? One poor cop, and all those people. Yeah.
They listened to him.
They did. They actually did, because the word traveled pretty quickly. The word traveled pretty quickly. And what they decided to do was to reroute everybody, send them directly down Commonwealth Avenue, away from the finish line, down to the Boston Common, where they could be gathered up and we could reunite them, direct them to how to reunite with their families and their belongings and stuff. So here's our timeline for the day. The first explosion was at 2:49. I make a notification on the radio at 2:50 for the tent and for operations that we have a mass casualty incident and that the Alpha tent is going to receive patients. Our web EOC is notified. The chief comes on and says we have a mass casualty incident, notify all the hospitals. At 2:55, I make a request for mutual aid. And then by 2:58, our first patients are being transported. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. We had every critical patient off of Boylston Street, either in a tent or in the back of an ambulance, in 18 minutes. Yeah. My folks did an unbelievable job that day. Could we ever duplicate that? If we were responding into that? No, I don't think so. What saved lives that day was, number one, we were already there and ready for it. We took a planned event and we treated it like a disaster, so that we're ready for anything to happen, so we can switch roles from a planned event to a disaster. And I might say, everybody that was transported that day by ambulance, they all survived. This is one of them fancy graphs that, you know, somebody in headquarters did for me to show you the da-da-da-da-da, just what I said. Every patient was transported. Then I will speak to this though. Hospital distribution became effective. We never once overburdened one particular hospital with too many patients. In Boston, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a hospital. We have 6 major trauma centers. The longest transport time any one of our particular crews would have from wherever in the city is maybe 15 minutes. You know? And this incident, as you'll see in the slide further, is surrounded by trauma centers. So they were evenly distributed. Part of our MCI plan is your loading officer goes through what we call CMED, Central Medical Direction. It's the same medical channels that our paramedics use to call in and talk to hospitals and whatnot. During MCIs, our loading officer operates on CMED. He talks to CMED and says, okay, I got 2 red, 2 green, in ambulance 51, where are they going? And the dispatcher will come back and say, okay, you take that truck will go to Brigham and Women's. So that we can, we can get the hospital's availability, they tell us what they have available, and then we can farm the patients out evenly. On top of it that day, one of our associate medical directors was about 7.5 months pregnant. So we put her in dispatch operations that day. And she was a great asset because she worked with this particular person and helped farm out the patients evenly. So it was very good. So we had our citywide dispatchers working on one channel. We had our tactical dispatcher working on another channel. We had our mutual aid folks working on another channel. But everybody was tied in together. And everybody was getting information. So, you know, we practiced the plan for years and years and years, and it actually worked on the day we needed it. You were asking about hospitals. Here you are. So each one of these H's is a hospital, and here's your bomb sites. So you have Mass General Hospital. You have Tufts Medical Center, which is both these are both adult and pediatric trauma centers. You have Boston Medical Center, which is the old Boston City Hospital, which is both adult and pediatric. You have Brigham and Women's, which is adult, but children's is right next door. And then you have the Beth Israel Deaconess. So we're pretty well surrounded with hospitals, you know, right in the center of town. And then we had 4 more that we shipped less injured people out to around the periphery of the city. My wife cursed me because her hospital got 26 patients that day. My wife was working that day, she's an emergency room nurse. My son was working that day, he's a Boston police officer. My daughter was supposed to come to the marathon and find Dad and get a nice spot at the finish line. Thank God she didn't. This is another fancy one of them, you know, pie graph jobs, you know. Okay, enough said. A special thank you, though, to Boston EMS's mutual aid partners. They each have a radio in all of their vehicles. They'll respond and back up us anytime we call, and they're able to communicate directly with our dispatch operations center. And if I'm at an incident, and they're at an incident, but they're a distance away, I can change channels on my radio and I can talk to them directly. So that was good, and that was done with Homeland Security dollars. They only pressed it once. This is very touchy. This is, reclaiming Boylston Street, the feds doing their investigation. Now the race is over. The MCI is over. We're looking at each other, it's 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and we're like, whoa, what did we just go through? I was telling Anthony last night, there's a few people that were profoundly affected by this. One of the fellows that was at the finish line did a tremendous job that day. Comes to me after it's over and says, I'm a mess. I gotta go. I can't stay. I just gotta go home and hug my wife and kids. I was like, go ahead, go. I completely understand. Anybody here involved in peer support? Okay. I'm one of them old school guys. I used to be like, hey, come on, stop your freaking crying. You're supposed to see better. What the hell is this? I got a whole new respect for peer support. We made our guys go, whether they wanted to or not. They didn't have to say anything, they didn't have to do anything, they just had to show up. And you want to see a bunch of grown men in the room crying, you should have been to a couple of the sessions I was in. So I got a whole new respect for peer support and the importance of it in this job. So, okay, the bad one's over with. But it didn't end there. Now, who did this to us? How do we go on? What's our next operational period look like? This just didn't end that day. This went on for the rest of the week until the capture and killing of one and capture of another. So you get the feds scouring the scene for evidence, and of course, in the middle of it all, the president's got to come to town. And you know what that does, right? We've already had a major terrorist event, and this guy wants to come. Well, even when the president comes for campaign things and everything else, it screws up traffic and the city, and everybody's, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, right? But I'll tell you, the best thing that could have happened was we had an all-faith healing service on Thursday of that week, and all the first responders went. And it was a great thing. Regardless of your political beliefs, that day, the man said the right things. And so did the other religious leaders that came. This is very touching, buddy. Okay, so the feds, they released the 2 pictures of Zanayev brothers. They get circulated. It's now late Thursday night, and there's a report of a carjacking on the Cambridge side of the Charles River, just over the border from Boston. Police officer responds, Cambridge police officer responds, speaks to a gentleman at a gas station. These 2 guys just hijacked his car. Just prior to that, an MIT police officer had been shot. They weren't sure if it was related. They get a description of the car, and don't you know it's a Mercedes-Benz SUV. They were able to call Mercedes-Benz, I guess, somehow, some vehicle tracking system. They were able to track the vehicle. This poor young officer, MIT University police officer, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They came upon him. He never had a chance to draw his weapon. They executed him sitting right in his car. Stole his weapon, stole his radio. Thanks. Somebody knows what they're doing. Okay. They tracked the car, and don't they get into it? A police chase ensues. Every police officer within 100 miles starts responding, including some of Boston's ambulances. Fortunately, our guys did decide to spark it, even though they went out of town. They met up with our SWAT team and our EOD guys, and they were right there with the first shootout. They ended up transporting Bomber 1 to the Beth Israel Hospital, where he died of his injuries. Officer Donahue was transported by, Officer Donahue was caught in the crossfire, was shot in the femoral artery, and if you want to talk about miraculous stories, he was without a pulse for 20 minutes in the emergency room and was resuscitated. He got a little bit of a limp, but he's doing A-okay. A friend of my son's. Doing A-okay. He will probably never return to active patrol duty. I would think he'd probably end up being a detective. But lucky man. So the governor, everybody gets together, and lo and behold, that Friday morning, wait, nobody goes to work. The city, the whole area, not just Boston, a significant portion of the area around Metro Boston is shut down. And everybody is to stay home, shelter in place. So, you know, the only time I ever heard of shelter in place is, you know, an impending hurricane or a pretty good snowstorm or something like that. Not for a law enforcement action. It was actually kind of spooky. The streets were deserted. Every place you turned, there were, you know, canine dogs, cops with automatic weapons, you know, military-type vehicles everywhere. Every imaginable piece of SWAT equipment you could think of was out there. And our guys. They do a house-to-house search. They're reasonably certain where the younger brother is. They start to go block by block, house to house, searching for him. Come 6 o'clock that night, they say, okay, it's dark. We're going to call off the search. They're pulling everybody out. And they're saying, hey, you know, let's regroup at the command post. Let's rethink this. So they back out of where they are. The governor's going to get on the news and lift the ban and say, okay, you know, let's try and return to normal. And this gentleman gets a phone call and says, yeah, hey, 911, yeah. You know that guy you've been looking for? Yeah. He's in my backyard. Really? Yeah, he's hiding my boat in my backyard. I just went outside to have a smoke, and there's blood all over my boat, and I looked in, he's in the boat. He's like, where they stopped searching, he was only like 50 yards over, more. They had just missed him by that much. So, with this information, they go off, and here's the gentleman's boat. These are pictures taken from the state police helicopter. You can see his, on the infrared, you can make out his image. There he is coming out of the boat. And there's one of our medics treating him. So, some mitigating factors. The time of day, you know, it happened at midday. That helped us. We were able to see what was going on. The weather was great. We knew the location. We had pretty good access. And as I said earlier, this was fireworks. This was a low-grade explosive. It was nothing like C4. It was nothing very sophisticated. It was meant to do two things, scare people and hurt people, and it did both. But it didn't cause us any collapse or any fire hazard. No, there were no, oh my Jesus, chemicals released into the atmosphere or anything like that. The other thing is we had no self-dispatch because we were already there. People weren't all over the area. I'm going. I'm sure you've had that. There was no need to recall anybody because 3/4 of the department was working that day. And there was very limited self-transport of personnel. This event, though, however, has made us rethink how we operate and the mantra that EMS has had for so long. EMS will only stay in the cold zone. Right? Have we heard that before? We'll only operate in the cold zone? Well, maybe for, sulfur, dulfur, whatever, that's being released from a tank thing, okay. But when people are bleeding out, we've already decided our SOP now is, whether the scene's secure or not, we're going in. We're going in under force protection with police. We're going to take care of people, and we're going to evacuate. Because time is life. Just like this saying over here is time matters. Time matters with heart muscle, time matters with brain tissue. Well, we always knew about the golden hour. Well, we proved it that day because none of us waited. We just ran in, we did our jobs, we evacuated the patients, and we get out of there. That's what we all need to think about. That's what we all need to do. You can publicize all these, studies from this person and that person and everything else. We proved it that day. Just to recap some things that I mentioned, treating major events as planned disasters. If you have the incident command system in place and you have enough resources on scene to support anything, if it's something should go sideways, that's the way you should do it, whether it's as simple a town fair or a 4th of July celebration or whatever. The only other thing we have to consider is how well we want to protect our personnel. And what each system has for personal protection. I don't know, I'm not familiar with the services here, but all our guys we have ballistic helmet, we have, everybody's issued their own body armor. We all have PPE that looks like fire turnout gear, has flash protection and bloodborne pathogen protection. It was all bought with our federal tax dollars. You might as well take advantage of them. Instead of buying something else stupid. Peer support, I gave you the shout out already, okay? But really, and incidents like this may have long, lingering effects. And it may sit in somebody's mind quietly for a very long time, and then they're going to respond to an incident, or something's going to happen in their lives, and it's going to trigger it. I can't say enough about our folks that day. There wasn't a lot of chatter on the radio. They stuck to their assignments. They're different from a fire crew. And this is no slight on firefighters. But, you ride in an engine company or in a truck company, you take your orders from your lieutenant or your captain. You get 2 EMTs or 2 paramedics in a truck, we've always been taught to act independently. You go to a scene, you get more than one patient, your partner goes that way, you go this way. Nobody needs to tell you what to do, you know what has to be done. So, for all of us, system sustainability. You need to be active in the public, get political, go out and take those dollars away from other people and put them into your systems. Nobody thinks about an ambulance until grandma falls down and breaks her hip, or grandpa has a stroke, or it affects somebody's life personally. No one thinks about it You always think about, well, you always need a cop. You always need a fireman. But for some reason, our profession still, even after 30, 40 years of national recognition, we're still the new kids on the block. And we have to fight for every little piece of change we get. So don't give up the fight. What did we learn that day? That we were friggin' lucky that we didn't get blown up. That was the first thing. Time saves lives. Tourniquets. Tourniquets, tourniquets, tourniquets. If nothing else, if you don't remember anything else I tell you here today, it's okay to put a tourniquet on a patient. Okay? If it means whether they're going to bleed out or lose a leg, I'd rather lose the leg than die. Tourniquets. I just got to tell you that. Remember that. Don't be afraid to use it. Go to your medical directors and talk about it. It's part of our established protocol. We put, on an average, 15 to 20 tourniquets on extremities a year in Boston. And I personally put on at least a half a dozen in my 30-year career that I know have made a difference to people. Our background, my background, medical background in tourniquets comes from an old Vietnam MASH doc. He was the chief surgeon at Boston City Hospital when I was a young rookie. And he trained most of us. And he made tourniquets for us for the ambulances out of surgical tubing and clamps. And taught us how to use them. And that's what we carry to this day. We don't carry commercial tourniquets on the trucks. We use surgical tubing and clamps. And we use them, like I said, a dozen to 15 times a year, and it's, for the most part, it saved each person's life that we put a tourniquet on. So if you don't take anything else away from anything else I say to you today, remember tourniquets. Reevaluate what can be done better in the future. Here we are, we plan for this event every year. We didn't have triage tags that day. They were back in the supply hut. Because if we thought we were going to have to triage anybody who would be in the medical station, well, now we've learned that every special event, every cart that rolls out, every foot team that rolls out, they're going to get a small pouch of triage tags as well. Because we didn't have any triage. Not that we probably would have had time to fill them out that day right on Boylston Street. And the other thing is don't underestimate your fellow man. I'm telling you, some of the people that I encountered on Boylston Street that day were just tremendous. They weren't running away. They just wanted to help. And that was okay that day because we had so many critically injured people. And then the last thing I can tell you is get out there and train with the fire department, train with the police department, train with your hospitals, train with other jurisdictions, train amongst yourselves. Our department trains once a month, everybody on the job. Mandatory, in-service training. I don't know what you guys do as far as your training goes, but everybody comes off the street once a month, 10 months out of the year, and we train for 8 hours. Instead of working a shift in the field, you go to the academy and you do 8 hours of training. It's invaluable. We hate going. Don't get me wrong, we hate going. And sometimes it's like watching paint dry, but it's important. Because then the muscle memory on a day like this takes over. Your instincts kick in. This is just another fancy way of saying what I just said. Preparing this, it is a nice looking slide though, isn't it? Come on. This is where our medical station, our big alpha tent was set up. It turned into a makeshift memorial after the event. People coming by. It's made the cover of Sports Illustrated. It made the cover of Boston Magazine and some others. These are memorials to our 3 fatalities that day. And this is a closing montage of things that was actually made by one of the guys' wives that works with us. I thank you all very much for your attention. I'm hoping I didn't keep you too long. And if we meet later on, I like Bud Light, so...